All right, so the first thing I need to know, by show of hands, how many of you have heard of evolution? Like, you know what it is?
I only know a little bit.
That's okay. That's what we're starting at. We're starting at the ground. Raise your hand if you have learned and studied things about evolution before. Wonderful. So for some of you, this is totally new. A-okay. So, one of the things that we do in here is we do, I don't want to say a lot of note taking, but you will be taking an ample amount of notes. And the reason being is because good science is good observation and then good experimentation. But to get to that experiment part, you got to have the work before it, right? And that's the notes. So the very first thing I'd like you guys to do today is take a look up here as soon as I put the correct screen up. There we go. Okay. Fossils provide evidence that genetic variation and environmental factors have led to evolution by natural selection. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to open up like a Word document or a Google Doc, somewhere where you can keep your notes in one place for the year. And when I say for the year, I mean wherever you're putting it is where you're going to keep going back for notes for the rest of the year. At the top of this, I want you to give it a title. I want you to write Evolution Notes 9/14. So open up a Word document, a Google Doc, whatever works best for you, and let's go ahead and start there. So do you have a Word document, Google Docs? Deshaun, same thing. If you need help, I can certainly come around and help you. Jason? We are going to be taking a couple notes today. No, Jason, can you open up like a Word document or a Google Docs? We're going to be taking notes today. So you just need somewhere where you can take notes.
So call it like
Evolution 9/14, because we will, to a certain degree, have daily notes in here. Give you guys a second to get that up. Awesome. Once you've had that document up, let's go ahead and start with this one. Really easy start, right? Fossils provide evidence that genetic variation and environmental factors have led to evolution by natural selection. We're going to focus on that one today, that natural selection thing. But let's just start off with the note. One says, really easy note today. Go ahead and write that down for me, please. So, Jason, do you have somewhere where you can take notes? Okay, that'll work. And then Jason, if you could write that down for me. We're going to be taking a couple notes today. Do you not have like a... No? Okay. Give you guys a minute. Just this right here. Fossils provide evidence that genetic variation and environmental factors have led to evolution by natural selection. What's that? Yes, please. Oh, the title for this is going to be Evolution 9/14. That way, whenever you need to refer back to your notes, you know exactly where to go. Once you've done that, please take a look back up at the TV so that I know that we are ready to move on. Take your time now. It's a whole new concept. Let's not get lost in the sauce early.
Evolution, what number?
9/14 is the day.
14.
It's today. And if you need help, let me know. I'm happy to give you a hand. Get out of your way here. So you can sit here so that you can face the what's best for you. Fossils provide evidence that genetic variation and environmental factors have led to evolution by natural selection. All right, well, some of you are wrapping up the last bit of notes there for this first one here. Let's talk about this natural selection thing. By show of hands, how many of you know what natural selection is? All right, so a couple. Brett, do you want to try to walk us through it a little bit? What in your idea, what is natural selection? Whatever you think, right or wrong.
I think it's like naturally selected.
Okay.
The
Can you expand upon that idea a little bit?
prime, like animal, I don't know.
Okay, so that's okay. You're starting in the right place. Just make sure you keep that mask up for me. Perfect. There you go.
I can't see because it's in glass.
I know. We'll figure that out. Gage, what do you think?
So, based on the environment which the creature lives in, it will either die out or continue to prosper depending on the abilities it has. So
Okay.
The more adept it is, and like something in Florida would have certain abilities that would make it more adaptable to this climate, the other creatures that live in it, if it's being a prey or predator.
Okay.
So over time things get more complicated. They get more, they cut out the fat of the sort of genetic code, and they get the more foundational, good sort of DNA.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
Let's expand upon that idea a little bit more, though. Okay. So you're saying that based off of environmental factors, an organism will have to adapt and change with its environment, and the one that's most successful will keep moving on.
Yeah.
Right. If that's true, explain to us why certain species go extinct. Why aren't there the larger dinosaurs anymore? Why are certain mammals that have gone extinct while there are still mammals today?
Well, it's because there are certain ones that do it better than the other, and
So why would that lead to extinction of other organisms?
things like procreation would probably slow down.
Okay, good. So pause there. We're going to expand upon that idea. I would like to introduce you to an organism called Archaeopteryx. Does anybody know what Archaeopteryx was?
No.
What does he look like?
Dinosaur.
Yeah, looks like a dinosaur. What does he also look like?
It's
A
like
little bit like
human.
It looks, well,
kind of.
what kind of humans are you looking at?
Very
Depends on when
skinny.
you look at it, but he looks kind of like maybe a lizard almost.
Yeah, this guy looks like a lizard. It looks like he's got wings too, doesn't it?
But lizards, maybe the bird thing, or like one of those flying dinosaurs.
Yeah, there you go. Kind of looks like a dinosaur, but it kind of looks like a bird and all these different
Like
things,
one of those
right?
flying dinosaurs you see.
This organism is called Archaeopteryx, and he probably looked like this. Now, why the heck are we talking about Archaeopteryx if we're talking about natural selection? The dinosaurs, 65 million years ago, yes, most of the dinosaurs did go extinct. But the dinosaurs are still around. They're birds. This looks a lot like what a bird would have been a long time ago, right? The reason being that there are still birds today is because they were able to adapt and change with the environment. So Gage really hit the nail on the head, right? With the whole idea of if they can change with the environment and better suit it, then they're more likely to move on. Archaeopteryx is a perfect example of that. Obviously, Archaeopteryx isn't around anymore, but its kin is birds. All modern day birds are directly related to dinosaurs. That's kind of crazy, right? But it's that whole idea of adaptation. They were able to change with this environment. So that huge, large size didn't really help them out anymore, but they were able to continue moving forward. And we're going to talk about this whole idea of food as we kind of move on. But for now, let's move on to our next slide, which is right here. Organisms that can blah, 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 blah. Organisms that can adapt to conditions, survive, and can produce offspring. Organisms that cannot adapt will not survive. Can you guys do me a favor and go ahead and write that down into your notes too? Easy notes there, just 2 seconds.
Is this the same
While
number?
you guys are writing down, what?
Is this the same number, evolution 9?
Oh yeah, the 914 is just the day. While you guys are writing it down, sorry, I didn't get you right. While you guys are writing it down, I'm going to talk about this chart that we're looking at down here at the bottom, and then we're looking at another example of some extreme cases of nature. So we have these snails, right? And these snails are cruising there doing their thing. We have this over here, overproduction. Populations produce too many young, and many must die. So on the one hand, it seems like these guys are doing pretty good, right? There's a lot of them. But that overproduction is a problem, right? Look at places where there is an overproduction of different organisms. For example, let's look up north, right? Wolves have gone extinct for several hundred years now in terms of Northern America. Deer explode in population. Well, that's a problem because now there's nothing killing off the deer, which means now the deer themselves are going to start to create a problem. Obviously, we intervene with that to kind of solve that problem. But the point being is that without something to kind of slow them down, they're going to kill themselves because they're consuming too much of their own resources. Then we have over here variation. Individuals show variation, some variations more favorable than others. A great example of that would be our distant cousin Neanderthal. Oh yeah, that's right. Now in terms of the intelligent apes, Homo sapien is kind of the last little remnants of this. But we evolved alongside our cousin Neanderthal. We were both seemed perfectly suited for those environments, but as the environment started to change, and then we had to start to adapt to these changes in our environment, the big brain is the thing that kind of propelled us forward. And Neanderthal eventually went extinct, and there's some evidence that we made it with Neanderthal along the way. But the point being is that though we were super, super similar, there was that one little thing that was better suited for that environment. Give you guys another minute or so to finish writing this down.
That's so neat design, so I can write the rest.
I'm sorry?
So I can write the rest.
Yeah, you're welcome to take pictures of the slides as well. I know that's what Brett does, and sometimes we'll refer back to those. It's up to you.
And plus they're all posted on the.
They are. We're just reviewing this together. I want you to have this in your notes though, and we'll talk more about that this Thursday with your first quiz. So, we have the overproduction, we have variation. Natural selection comes into play. Natural selection, blah, blah, man, I'm having a tongue twister kind of thing with this mess. Natural selection favors the best suited at the time. That at the time thing is really important, and we're going to talk about why. So bear with me for just a second.
Okay, I got it.
Good. If you guys could all please take a look at the TV, we are going to look at an extreme case of mammal evolution. So, yes,
Wasn't it down in North America?
it was, yes, his territory was all of North America.
Like I forget what they're called. They're
We're going to talk about that. Does anyone know what the name of this organism is?
I forget. But
That's okay, we're going to talk about it.
An ancestor of a bear, right?
This is a bear. This is the short-faced bear.
I remember that now.
The short-faced bear was hands down the most successful terrestrial predatory mammal ever. It had zero competition until humans came to North America. Perfectly suited for its environment. Like a literal giant killing machine. And when I say giant, I mean giant. This was an enormous predatory animal, but it still went extinct even though it had zero things to worry about. Why? What happened? Go ahead, Emerson.
The ancestors of modern day Amerindians came to North America and hunting mammoths and stuff.
Mhm.
I guess the short-faced bear must because they must really it's obvious that they must have been meat eaters too, and then they I don't know though.
No, that's okay.
I'm not an expert, but what I think, this is my opinion, is that they were I don't think it's necessarily human strategy killing them, but because they are very big.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the ancestors of modern day Amerindians came and hunted a lot of the animals like mammoths, mastodons, and they must have probably relied on them too, I'm guessing.
Okay.
I'm guessing, I don't know.
No, that's
They
okay.
could hunted, overhunted too much, I think. There's such thing as overhunting, and
It's true.
It just it went a little too far so that they kind of got extinct. They didn't have enough to survive, enough to eat.
So partially, yeah, you're on the right track with that. You're referring to some older archaeological findings. Yeah, humans did play a role in the extinction of these animals. But what was happening before that was they were already starting to go extinct. We kind of helped push
Ice
it.
Age.
That's right. We kind of helped push it forward, and I'm glad you said Ice Age because this organism did exist during the Ice Age. Towards the end of the Ice Age, however, is when
Is when they went extinct because it became hotter and then that's why I actually get that. I remember this from a documentary. This guy, this
Mhm.
archaeologist, said it. He said that that when humans first arrived, the mammoths, right? Because at the end of the last ice age,
Mm-hmm.
mammoths they weren't able. It was hard for them to survive, and humans just saw them they're big, heavy. They had a lot of meat, and they were just walking around like burning wood
So-
like that, and it's like too hot for it.
Okay.
And just that made them much slower, so humans just targeted them.
Well, I'm gonna cut you off there because it sounds like you're the perfect guy to help me answer this question. All right, Emerson. We know that he was really successful,
Yeah.
right? He was perfectly suited for his environment at the time. So why are there no short-faced bears now?
Because of the end of the last glacial period, which, along with the arrival of Amerindians, it coincided together, I guess, and it just caused them to somehow go extinct.
Okay. Gage?
Well, somebody else answered.
The environment changed.
The environment changed.
It could no longer sustain its genetic, it built all of those genetic, hunting sort of machine, as you were saying,
Mhm.
just domination.
Yep.
The need for that was no longer sufficient.
Yes.
And so it died out.
Right. Now, let's take that one step further. Ante, you're going to help me out here. Okay? You ready? So, we know that he was super successful. We know that he went extinct. And we know that the change in environment kind of played a role in that, right? How does this relate to what we're talking about when we're talking about the survivability of an organism in terms of natural selection? What are we talking about? Like, why does this matter when we're talking about natural selection? How is this a prime example of that?
Because, I don't know, maybe you couldn't adapt, and that's why you couldn't
Yeah. Couldn't adapt to the changing environment. He was perfectly suited for the old one, but didn't change with the new one. So he's gone. And that's how organisms go extinct, and that's how natural selection kind of plays its role. When we're talking about evolution, it really all kind of boils down to that, right? The evolution of a species is completely dependent on its ability to adapt and change with its environment. It's important to note that these changes take millions of years for you to have these extreme changes. We'll talk about Darwin tomorrow and how, that's not necessarily the case when you're looking at small changes, but we'll talk about that more tomorrow. All right. Which leads us to the last part of this natural selection process, inheritance. Variations are inherited. The best suited variants produce more offspring. So, what we mean by that is if the trait is successful, it will move on. That's why we don't see these extreme conditions in the natural world, right? How many tigers do you see with buck teeth? None, right? It's not conducive for the environment. So, let's take a look at your first question today. Which pair of organisms listed in the table are most closely related? Organisms are classified into categories based on their shared characteristics. These categories are organized into different levels of classification. Study the table below. What I want you to do is take a minute. I want you to look at this table. Now we'll talk about domain, kingdom, and phylum and things like that as we move forward, but let's just focus on this for now. So, based off of these responses here, which organisms are more closely related? Give yourself a second. Take a look up there. Give you a minute to figure out your response. When you think you have your answer, go ahead and raise your hand for me.
I don't think I want to answer it.
No, just raise your hand when you think you have the answer. That doesn't necessarily mean it's call. What's
I
that?
don't think I feel like answering. Somebody else.
That's okay, you don't have to. Just raise your hand when you think you have it.
I know, I'm just gonna let somebody else do it. Time go up.
There you go. All right, good. Brett, you need to step out for a second?
Yeah, let me get some.
Yeah, go grab some water, buddy. Nico, what do you think? A, B, C, or D? The dog and the robin, the whale and the dog, the beetle and the robin, or the robin and the whale? B, the whale and the dog. Raise your hand if you agree with Nico that the whale and the dog, based off of this chart, are most closely related. Good job, you're right. Nico, why? Why are you right? Convince me. What's that?
We're in the same class.
Okay, so this other stuff doesn't matter at all. They're in the same class, so they're the most closely related.
It does matter as well.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
When we look at each of these things, is there any difference?
like.
No. If you were just looking at this right here, you would think that they were the same thing, right? But these are two organisms that are in two extremely different environments, right? So, Nico, we're going to take this one step further, right? We're talking about natural selection today. These two organisms are so closely related, but they're so different. How the heck did that happen?
Well, one needed to adapt on land, and the other one didn't.
But the fact that these two organisms are so insanely closely related. For example, we could say that ants, right, or terrestrial-based arthropods, are perfect for land, and then we have crab and shrimp and other things in the ocean too, right? Other versions of arthropods, but there are other organisms that have evolved to live within the oceans, right? Fish. They have nothing to do with arthropods. Oh. So, why does it matter that these two are pretty much the same thing
Why does it matter?
in terms of their genetics?
Well,
Yeah, we're talking about natural selection, right?
Well,
So let's try to snowball into that, right? These two things are pretty much the same thing if we're looking at this. If we were to take the names out and just look at this, you'd think they're both the same thing, right? Why does that matter?
because
Just give me like your idea.
they probably adapt similar.
Ah, okay, we're on the right path. Gage?
they probably came from the same like organism, and they branched.
Boom, there it is. So good job, both of you guys, putting those two things together. The fact that these two organisms are so closely related means that somewhere along the line, they probably have some kind of common ancestor and then split to adapt to different environments. And that's what we're talking about, what we didn't see with the short-faced bear. Great job, guys. They were able to change with their environments in two extremely different ways. We're actually going to look at the evolutionary pathway of whales tomorrow, so just hold your questions on that one. But the reason why this is important is because it shows us that adaptation through evolution is completely deterministic based off of
Environment.
what is needed. And what works moves on, and what doesn't. Does that make sense so far? Yes? Okay. We'll talk about that one tomorrow. So now we're going to talk about diversity, evolution, living organisms if we have time. Where are we at right now? I got you guys till 11:40. We're cutting it close, but we are going to try to move forward. What evidence supports the scientific theory of evolution? The fossil record. Does anyone in here know what the fossil record is? Raise your hand if you know what the fossil record is.
I think I do.
You think you do? Awesome. Ren, help me out with something. I got a question for you. You see these skulls down here at the bottom? You see these? This kind of looks a lot like this, right? Yeah. And this kind of looks a lot like this, doesn't it? Right? This does not look like that. Does it? No, not really. They look like two different things. But if we're able to follow this gradual progression downward, we could say, oh, well, this looks like this, and this looks like this, and so on and so forth, right? The fossil record is what paints the picture. It lets us know the general and gradual progression of organisms. We'll talk more about that as we move forward. This is going to be our last slide today. Genetic variation and environmental factors contribute to evolution by natural selection and diversity of organisms. Can you guys do me a favor? This is going to be your last note today. Can you go ahead and write that down? Just one sentence. Just one sentence. Write that down in your science notes so you have it. Genetic variation and environmental factors contribute to evolution by natural selection and diversity of organisms. Let me get out of your way. Let's get out of your way. Give you guys a second to write that down, and then we're going to answer one last question today. Okay, we just got done talking about these whales and dogs, right? Common ancestor, different evolutionary pathway. Up here, we can see that there are beetles. These beetles are both brown and brown and green, right? I guess the fusion name would be brown, right? we can see that some are more green than others, and others are more brown than others, right? Right up here at the top, you see that? Hey, Ante, let's make sure we're paying attention, all right? Now, which of these organisms, and Casper, you're gonna help me out here, which one do you think you're more likely to see?
The green one.
The green one, right? So we look down here, we see that the birds, young green beetles, our favorite. We can see that there's lots of green beetles, and there's a couple of orange beetles. Looking at it, or I'm sorry, brown beetles. Looking at it, you might say to yourself, like, well, obviously the dominant life form here in this situation is the green beetles. Evolution must favor this green coloration. But we can see as the next generation comes into play, we just have brown beetles. What has happened to the green beetles?
They die out.
They died out.
Because genetically,
Ah, very good. Okay.
Their genetic traits weren't strong enough.
They weren't favorable.
They weren't
So
favorable.
let's use that word favorable, or use that a lot. Okay?
Well, I mean, I would say also just like what that graphic is displaying is that
Uh-huh.
if you are preferred by a predator compared to a different prey, you will die out sooner if like there is, you know, that if the population of predators is large,
Mhm.
they will come for you if they prefer you. You know what I mean? And so then
Mhm.
the less preferable will, you know,
Yeah.
become.
No, you're on the right track.
Yeah.
So, Gage, I'm going to use you to help me answer this then, okay? When we look here,
Yeah.
we can see that only brown beetles are left.
Mhm.
What happened to the green beetles?
They were eaten.
Or eaten.
Yeah.
So when we look here, right, would we say that the green beetles evolved to become brown? Or would we say something else?
I would say that that's possible, but I think that what happened was that the opportunity was given to the brown beetles to replace them.
Okay. That's a good answer. Brett?
The green beetles were going on.
They did, right?
And then the brown beetles came by.
Very good.
Overpopulated.
The thing I want to conclude with, though, is did the green beetles become brown?
No,
No.
No. Why?
because there was probably a reason why they were green.
Yeah,
And
right.
I don't think it was.
They probably suited the previous environment.
Yeah, and so there was no need apparent, because again, it's predators, so it's not like something environmentally,
Mhm.
like, it's not like, you know, the ground has changed, you know, texture or whatever, and therefore I need to, you know,
Mhm.
change over time. It's
Perhaps.
something- Yeah, it's
Predator.
yeah, it's something that needs to be, it's harder to adapt to that, because if you get caught by a bird, you're gonna die.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
And so it's not like there's experience there, because they just died. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to conclude with here. In terms of these green beetles did not just spontaneously become brown, because when you look here, you might count the same number of organisms, right? That's not how evolution works. These green beetles weren't like, uh-oh, and then they became brown. What happens is as they started to die off, only brown beetles are mating now. Because there might be a couple of green beetles that are around that are still trying to reproduce, and they might. Their genetic information might be found later on, but it just wasn't suited for this environment. These brown beetles, since they're the ones that are surviving this change in environment, they're the ones reproducing. Hence why we only have brown beetles. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, we're going to be going into a lot more detail about this tomorrow, but for now, does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns?
Not necessarily.
No?
I don't know about anything else.
No, that's okay. So, hold on just a second.